Hey guys, how's it going? It's your boy M.K.S here, back with another video. I should really try and think of a different intro, I know, but anyway, I've been thinking about this for quite a while, about how I would love to empower Indigenous people from across Australasia, like Aborigines, Tories and Strait Pacific Islanders, or how you pronounce it, and Maoris. So I talked about empowerment plans for different groups before, I think. Or at least one or two. So, but anyway, I thought I would do this obviously for Indigenous people from Australasia. So I don't know if there's ever been an empowerment plan which talks about how to empower Indigenous people from Australasia. This could be a world first, even, I'm not sure. But anyway, I know the government has done a few things to try and empower Indigenous Australasians, but I think a lot more, I'm sure, could be done. So I thought I'd talk about some ideas, and I'll try not to be too repetitive from previous videos, but I think it would be quite a good and noble and even, dare I say, important thing to support Indigenous people from across Australasia. As ever, at the end, please let me know what your thoughts are or any ideas you have. So here goes. So number one, I think it'd be great to bring together Indigenous people from across Australasia to work together as one sort of group, one sort of body, so that they can unite together and maybe even work with other groups like Indigenous people from Africa, the Native Americans, and people from Asia, what I call the four, basically. So I'd love to talk about Indigenous people's role within that and how they can be hopefully empowered in different areas. So again, I think it'd be great to bring them together to support each other and to see what allies they can work together with. Number two, I think it'd be great to empower Indigenous people from across Australasia in STEM. And for those who don't know, who haven't seen my previous videos, or who don't know what this acronym stands for, STEM stands for Science, Tech, Engineering and Maths. So I think it'd be great to see Indigenous people empowered in those areas, especially technology, working together with people from Africa, especially in technology, but again, just generally in those sorts of areas, and look at allies that could support Indigenous people, like people of colour. I think definitely should support Indigenous Australasians as much as possible, from all around the world. I think it'd be great to support their tourism industry as well in the future. Hopefully, in 2022, Godspeed, their tourism industry can be supported as much as possible. I've been to a tourism centre for Indigenous people where you can find out a bit about their way of life, and I think it'd be great if that could be supported in the future. Unfortunately, with COVID, obviously at the moment that's not possible, but I think it would be great if it was empowered in the future somehow. And again, having allies and that sort of thing. Number three, I think it'd be great to hear from Indigenous people about what sort of support they would want and what things like what freedom would mean to them. In the past, I've often envisioned having like a microphone and going into or doing interviews basically with people from Indigenous Australasian backgrounds to hear their opinions about things like what freedom means to them or things like that. So it'd be great to do that in the future, obviously, when traveling is safe to do. And yeah, maybe even hearing from them online. I'd love to connect with Indigenous people from across Australasia on Facebook and things like that, or just generally on social media, but especially on Facebook and maybe on YouTube, and supporting them to create their own YouTube channels and things like that. Sorry. Number four, again, I think it'd be great to hear their voice about what ways they feel they could be empowered, like what sort of things they would like to do, rather than just share my own ideas and say, I think this would empower you. I think that it would be good to hear what sort of things they would like to see and that sort of thing. I'd love to see more Indigenous people in politics and in the police, so that they could get more rights. Like when I've heard of Indigenous people, like Aborigines from Australia, sorry, being stopped by the police or harassed by the police. So I think if more Indigenous Australasians were in the police and the law and in politics, they could empower each other to make sure that they get equal access to justice, and hopefully be encouraged to reach their full potential and not. I'd certainly discourage crime and all that, but obviously if they're given more political and financial empowerment, hopefully that would help them in that area as well. And since it's International Women's Day today, I think it'd be great to support Indigenous Australasian women in those areas especially. Number five, again, I'd love to hear their views, but maybe also if they could be encouraged in areas where they wouldn't, maybe for instance, Indigenous people wouldn't have aspirations in STEM, but maybe they could be encouraged to go into those areas and be encouraged that is going to help them in the future. So encouraging more Indigenous people into STEM programs and things like that would be excellent, I think, and supporting them as much as possible in those areas. Number 6, I'd love to see, like, as Italian football fan, as I often say, to fundraise for Indigenous Australasians, like in business, enterprise, whatever you call it, and those areas I've talked about, and all sorts of areas which could empower them in the future. I think it'd be amazing to see more Indigenous people in those areas, like in politics, business, technology, as I say, STEM generally, in the police, in the law, as judges, lawyers or solicitors or whatever they call them in Australia. I think here in the UK they call them solicitors, but in America they call them lawyers. So I'm not sure what term Australasians use, but yeah. So I think it'd be great to see them having political empowerment, like in the UN and things like that as well. And number 7, again, as a Celtic fan as well, I'd love to see Celtic fundraise and like have. I'd love for Italian football and Celtic to also have like football academies for young Indigenous people, so to get into football or soccer, for those who prefer that term, and other sports as well. Perhaps they could get into other sports and work together with people like in rugby or other areas. But because I'm a football fan, I'm going to talk more about football. Maybe even they could try the American football stuff and all that kind of thing as well. Number 8, again, I'd love to see like people of colour around the world supporting Indigenous people. I think it'd be great, personally. I know this is a bit of a controversial view, but I think it'd be great if instead of supporting the military or things like that, or that sort of thing, which in my opinion invades other countries, which I disagree with, I think it'd be great if we instead supported Indigenous people from Australasia to network and like support them in business and things like that. And like people who have done well, people of colour who have done well could go in there, like train Indigenous Australasians to networking events or things like that, either online or in the future. Also like physical events where they can meet up in person, like when it's safe to travel. Number 9, I'd love to support and encourage Indigenous people, as I say before, like in the police or in the law, but also involved in law, but also as writers, poets, and I know there is already Indigenous art, but I'd love to see that being encouraged, like so it could be sold more around the world and people finding out about their culture as much as possible, and like Indigenous people talking about their culture and telling their story and that sort of thing. And number 10, I'd especially love to empower Indigenous youth. I've heard like of things where, say for instance, excuse me, Indigenous New Zealanders, like Maoris, if I've pronounced that right, a lot of time they have a high suicide rate, unfortunately. And I think if they were encouraged to find things that keep them occupied and have a purpose, that could hopefully tackle those sorts of problems as well as other problems they face, like poverty and things like that. So if they were supported in business, politics, technology, STEM, and those sorts of areas, and like environmentalism, planting trees, and being involved in like tackling environmental problems, even like, although this probably doesn't feel very empowering, but if they did things like potentially like things like litter picking or whatever, or in the future, maybe that could help them, volunteering or things like that. But also, as I say, hope to find things that will, in the longer term, empower them financially, and also they'll be able to work on the environment and that sort of thing. And yeah, I'd love to see Indigenous people from Australasia have 10% of the property and land ownership, and also like 10% of the political class, and also 10% of the police force to be Indigenous. So I'd love to hear, as I say, what you think, especially if you are Indigenous to Australasia yourself. And I am out. Peace and love.